coming up.
There's so much to say about this too, no? But I think that talking about their origin stories can also help us frame what will come later, right?
Oh yes, no, certainly, yeah. I mean, it's definitely Merlin in the proto stories that's much more present than Morgan Le Fay. You see her later on, almost like growing up together with King Arthur, as they are
Yeah,
half brother, half sister, probably. Yeah,
yeah.
genetically. Yeah, yeah. So we could just mention that story about how Arthur actually came into the world, and the first real evidence of Merlin being a kingmaker.
Okay.
If you want to.
Yeah,
Is
sure.
that an idea? Just to proceed with
Yes.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, that
So again,
because also when you're talking about the origin of Arthur, you are also talking about the origin of Morgan as well, or Morgane, as I like to call her.
exactly. Yes.
Hello, Synchronauts. How are you? Welcome to another Elysian Roundtable meeting with my dear friend and teacher and mentor, Mike Bais from Circle of Avalon in the Netherlands. How are you, dear Mike? Welcome.
Very well. Yes, definitely. As
Awesome.
always, a pleasure to be with you and looking forward.
Thank you. And I am Aida from Mexxicamelot here in Mexico, Central Mexico. I hope that everybody has been enjoying the spectacles that nature is gifting us this year of 2024. We are recording this on actually May the 13th, Monday the 13th. Quite an eventful year, no, Mike, in terms of nature,
Hmm.
astrology, social and natural phenomenon. Amazing, no, what we're being able to witness in the world.
Very much. Yes. And yeah, we can elaborate a bit more on that concerning our theme of Camelot and Avalon.
I think that
Sure.
it's quite aligned in a way, what we're going through, and we can compare
Hmm.
a little bit of that with the mythology of Avalon and Camelot. So
Yes.
without further ado, let's go to our presentation. So just give me a moment because we're using a Zoom to record this program, and there have been changes, and I'm trying to catch up on that. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to see how all the changes, I'm trying to get used to it. I hope that they will
Sure.
be for the good. So we're continuing with our roundtable theme of Avalon. But before we
Yeah.
begin, let's remind everybody about your latest book. Can you tell us a little bit
Thank you.
more about the book? Remind us what it's about and where we can buy it.
Yeah, so this is a Watkins publication, Watkins Books in London. Uh, for some, it may be a well-known publisher and bookshop. And they asked me to write a book about Kabbalah. So this is an introduction book, generally about Kabbalah, but very much hands-on for the aspirant or beginner Kabbalist. So it's quite practical, theory and practice throughout the whole book. So you can really have a fairly good idea what is this all about and how can I start my path if you want to, of course. But I also read about people who are quite knowledgeable about the subject and they still very much enjoy it because they hear different ways of describing the same thing and the different angles that are being mentioned. Yeah,
Yes.
so
Well, it's
quite
interesting
fresh.
what you're saying because we also have to be reminded that there are many streams of Kabbalah. There is not
Hmm.
just one, there are many different schools and traditions.
Yeah.
And in my experience, talking about, for example, the use of the Galactic Mayan synchronometer, if you
Hmm.
also look at other time measurements like the Chinese calendar, or I don't know, the Chilean, for example, the one that they used in South America, the Aztecs, the
Yeah.
Mayans, like the original counts of time, if you look at all of them, the Egyptians,
Hmm.
they'll have something to teach you because they're talking about the same phenomenon, which is time. And in this case, Kabbalah is talking about creation and life. our place in the
Yes.
universe. But these are different perspectives. Instead of saying this is wrong and this is right, this is more like, why don't we look at it this way from a different angle? So what you're doing with your book, in my opinion, is that you're bringing many different points of view from ancient schools to the modern world with very practical
Hmm.
exercises. Because, and
Yeah.
we've had these conversations on our own, that some of the teachings in traditions, in mystical traditions, they are very obsolete because they're not catching up with the times. And it
Yeah.
is the
Sure.
work of many people like you, some people like me. We're trying to catch up certain traditions or certain knowledge to the modern
Hmm.
times. And this book is an effort to do this. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, thank you for the addition. Very much so. Yeah, it's written for the contemporary times and for the human being of the 20 within the 21st century. Yeah.
Yeah. And where can people buy this book?
Basically, let's say everywhere, at least online. It's all over the planet.
Okay.
It's so far only in English, but you can buy it anywhere and physically in many different bookshops as well, especially in the UK and some in the US, for example. So, you know, the Waterstones, the Treadwells, um, those kind of bookshops. Yeah, but basically ordering it, no problem. And some people order it directly from me. It's not always the cheapest, I always say to people, because I have to send it from Holland. So if you live far away, often if you have a kind of an Amazon connection or whatever it is,
Yeah.
it's more favorable. Yes.
Yeah, you're correct. Like
So,
for example, me living in Mexico, you can get it through Amazon and it
mm,
gets delivered to your door. So that's a good
yes.
option for those of us who live in the Americas. And
Yeah.
so, Synchronauts, if you have read the book, if you know what it's about, if you have been to one of Mike's workshops, you can leave something in the comments here in our video to let us know what you think about it and what you think about also what we're doing with um this enterprise now, with this
Yeah.
adventure of the Vision Roundtable with the different topics that we're talking about. We would like to hear from you. And if you're watching
Mm,
us on YouTube, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and click on the little bell so that every time that we have a new video, you can come up and see what we're sharing. Normally, we're recording this like once a month, more or less,
yeah.
depending. If it gets hectic, maybe we'll take a little bit longer, but we're trying to get this space because, well, this topic of Avalon, oh my God. Okay, I'm gonna move from this slide to the one where we were
Wonderful.
at last time. Like, we might seem to be going very slowly, but there is a
Mm,
reason because the tradition, one thing is just looking at the stories, not just reading the stories from different sources. And another
mm,
one is try to bring it together with Kabbalistic teachings, no?
yes.
So it takes time. It takes
It
time and
does indeed.
grounding in the understanding. But so this is where we were at last time. Can you tell us a little bit more about this image, please?
No, of course. Well, very colorful, of course, full of symbols and very full of suggestions because of that. So, what we see here, the figure sleeping there could be a man or a woman. This is quite a well-known theme in mythology and also in biblical stories. The sleeping to the world, so being unconscious to the world, and dreaming or waking up in a different world. That can be the dream world, which in psychology you could see sometimes as the collective unconscious, and
Mm,
where things happen that in everyday life they do not occur within the cycles and patterns of daily life. So and in particular, what we see here is the natural environment, which is the vegetable level of the tree. And exactly. So normally on the tree of life, that would be the lower phase of the tree of life. And that's our everyday life, our concerns, our social life, our work, etc. It has not much to do with building consciously a kingdom or a spiritual kingdom, of course, in the metaphorical sense of the word. And now, like in the story of Genesis, where we have a Garden of Eden with a tree or trees with apples, in the Celtic mythology, the apple is also a fruit of wisdom. And it's the same in the Eden garden. Although some interpretations of the apple, of course, are a symbol of evil, but in a metaphysical, esoteric sense, it is a symbol of wisdom. You eat from knowledge and you become knowledgeable of a certain thing. And it's the same in the Celtic tradition. The apple, and of course, the reference to the name Avalon or Afalach in the Celtic language, I'm just saying is in general, especially from the Welsh, means the Isle of Holy Apples.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a reference to this. And in the background, you see this winding path going up a hill or a mountain in this case. And that's very typical for the path of the initiate. So the path for most of us doesn't go straight to a certain objective. No, unfortunately not. So on the Tree of Life, this would be the meandering path going up the Tree of Life. I realize, I'm sorry about this, that here outside, all of a sudden, it becomes very cloudy and dark. So inside here as well.
Yes, turn on the light, please.
Yeah, out of the...
Okay, we can't hear you because you're away from your microphone, but we can, yeah, much better.
Yeah, there I am again. Sorry about that. Yeah,
no,
from very sunny to very, very cloudy, and storm is coming, or at least some thunder. Yes.
Okay.
So going up the Tree of Life is going up the path of initiation, or the serpent way, the Teshuvah, as we call it in Kabbalah, the path of going inside. And for people who are a bit more knowledgeable about Kabbalah, that's the Merkaba path. So that's back to the origin. Now, what we see is not per se, the castle is not a symbol of Avalon, but it's the symbol of Camelot. So that's the spiritual kingdom. Something to reach out for, but it also needs to be established. We talked about this before. So it's not an earthly kingdom. It's not something you can inherit through blood, through your inheritance as a king or a queen, prince or princess. Camelot is a spiritual kingdom. So it is something that you have to work on, and you have to attain through merit and effort, and through the help of something coming your way from the higher worlds, the upper part of the tree. And those higher worlds, that is Avalon. That's the Briatic world, where we find the teachers, the saints and sages, the archetypes that support us. Well, and Avalon on the tree, in more Christian Judaic terms, that's the Garden of Eden. That's the place, so to speak, of deeper and higher wisdom. And it serves us, if we contact it at least, it serves us to build a kingdom of heaven on earth. Like this famous man said, that carpenter from the Middle East. So this is like an initiation moment of sleeping, apparently, to something else, and waking up to another dream. You could say that's the preparation.
So it is a preparation for, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it doesn't matter. This is the preparation for the journey.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, like gather your strength, because you're on the adventure and it's going to be quite a ride, definitely. And it's interesting I just want to add something about the apples, because I just remembered, I know that not only in Mexico, but in many different countries, in the olden times, not so old, but even my generation, and I'm Gen X, we used to say like, if you want to give something to your teacher every day, you would give them an apple.
Ah,
No, like there
right.
is this correlation between the apple and the teacher. And it just
Mm,
dawned on me, based on what you're saying, of course, we are gifting the apple to the teacher because your teacher has the knowledge that you don't have. So it's like a
yes.
reference back to that, like, wow, this is like really cool, really, really interesting. Like when we see the symbology
Mm,
behind all of these mythologies, you understand that there's a reason why, and it always ends up permeating like the 3D world, as I call it, or our everyday life,
yes.
and we're not aware of it. And this is a very good example of that.
Mm, yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, there's so many references to uh, this particular fruit, the apple, related to man, um, and the wisdom of man eventually.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's so many things to mention. One of them is if you cut the apple in half, you'll find a
Yes.
pentagram, which is the symbol in a geometrical sense of the human being, of Adam Kadmon. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about, like, you read my mind. This is amazing.
Mm,
It
yes.
also brings me back because the shape of the five-pointed star, and we can see it in the Vitruvian Man, no,
Yeah. Hmm.
from Da Vinci. But also,
Yeah.
it's also in the feminine counterpart. It would be like the Venus part, no, like that feminine side that we
Hmm.
have, everybody, both the feminine and the masculine, both yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
interacting to. And I don't know, at some point online I saw an image of, like, actually somebody put them together, like the Venus from Botticelli with the
Yeah.
Vitruvian Man in the same image. I'm gonna see if I can find it. It looks
Mm,
really
interesting.
amazing. So,
Yeah.
and we're just seeing this from the apple, just cutting it, no, transversely from. This is amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Two
Nature has
pieces of one whole. Yeah.
nature has archetypes there as well. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, nature is, of course, the greatest artist around, and it shows us all the symmetry and the geometry, and that is actually present within the unseen higher worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Uh,
it's fascinating. Exactly.
yeah. It is
Yeah.
fascinating. All
Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to add
Yeah.
anything else to the image, or do we move on?
I think we can move on. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So our next slide, you tell me if you want to move forward, or do we continue talking about now Morgan, Le Fay, and Merlin?
Yes, we do. Yeah, let's
Hey,
say something about them.
okay.
Um, so this is respectively the high priest, Merlin, and the high priestess of Avalon. Uh, of course, they are described in different ways through different stories. There are many romances, so not everybody is saying the same things about these two characters. But they are always related to Avalon, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Morgana, or Morgan the Fay, is the high priest, one of the nine sisters of Avalon, they are called. And not much is being said about the other sisters, but Morgan Le Fay is very well known. And both of these characters have at least this in common, is that they have definitely their own agenda.
Mm.
They seem to be sometimes very benign towards the normal world and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes malignant or maybe not evil, but definitely not sympathetic towards humans and
Mm.
definitely not concerned with their emotions, their welfare. So that's something that you see often
I'm sorry.
happening.
I have a question here because, well,
Yeah,
obviously, like I'm still learning about these mythologies, and I'm sure maybe a lot of people who are watching this or listening to us, they also
yeah,
may have these questions. Because I, like, if you go to movies and to series, like for example the Excalibur movie from the 80s, like
yeah,
Morgan has a very bad reputation. No? Morgane is like,
mm,
she's like the wickedest of the most wicked witches in the world.
yeah, yeah,
And but also Merlin, he comes off as being very manipulative. They both have
yes,
like this dark, as you say, no, they're pushing their own agenda Because supposedly, and I say quote unquote supposedly, their agenda is to serve the higher worlds, right? That's what
Yes,
they think.
that's it.
But in reality, it's end up being a horrible entanglement that makes a mess, you know, from those stories. Like I'm
Yeah.
talking about in those particular stories. But
Yeah.
would it be that, I mean, I have never thought about this until right now. Are Morgan Le Fay and Merlin not human, and that's why they have this contempt towards humans? Maybe?
Mm. Yeah, well, definitely so. I mean, Morgan Le Fay, she is from the Fae, that's what it means, or from the She. It's another way of saying it. She is not completely human or half human because she's half fairy, half human. And some authors and people also within the Western esoteric tradition of the last century, the 20th and 21st century now, are very sympathetic towards the idea that she is from, um, well, the realm of fairy. But the older scriptures and poems do not say this directly. So it's an assumption or an idea or an inspiration. And the same goes for Merlin. He, and this is clearly said in the scriptures or the stories of Geoffrey of Monmouth and some other authors. Um, Interestingly, these are monks from Wales, so who wrote these stories, half based on fiction, but the other half based upon real historical facts. So that's Geoffrey of Monmouth, and for people who are interested, and Gildas. Gildas is another monk in in these times, and they talk about, for example, the fact that Merlin is a boy growing up in a little village around the northern parts of Wales, at Snowdonia currently, and Bala Lake, which is still there physically.
Okay.
And there he is born out of a human mother, but his father was said to be a demon or at least something unnatural.
Okay.
And because there was a Christian world very strongly present, it was immediately associated with the devil or a demon.
Uh-huh.
So again, like Morgan, Merlin wasn't completely human. And
That makes sense. That explains why
mm,
would they not be sympathetic to humans? Because they might think, oh, they're beneath me, so why should I care if I have to sacrifice one or two in the way if we're gonna
mm.
achieve something greater, no?
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that's what you see in the stories. It's not just that they are like personally against human beings, but they see that the average human being has completely no interest in the higher worlds or in Avalon and live their life like animals. So there's no way, or may take a very long time, that human beings will establish out of themselves something higher than a natural kingdom. This is
Yeah.
what animals do. So humanity needs a hand. It needs support. It needs structure. It needs discipline.
Yes, we
So,
do.
and it needs teaching. Yeah, that's it. Um, that's what the religions of the world try to do, and the spiritual traditions of the world try to do. This is the same story here.
Hmm.
So, again, at times, Merlin is completely not interested in for example, emotions of the king and queen, the father and mother of the Arthur to be born. But he selects these two people on the basis of who they are, what DNA they have, what is their spiritual heritage and background. So they are the perfect pair to give rise to a king. And that's much more important than the two players on that chessboard, so to speak.
This is interesting that you're mentioning about like because yes, it is like a chessboard and they're moving the pieces. And
Mm,
also like this is also an archetypal theme because listening
yeah.
to you describe this, I'm just being reminded of the movie Dune,
Mm-hmm.
that the
Yeah.
second
Yeah.
part has just come out a few months ago. or just
Yes.
recently. Um, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people who have read the books or they know the 1984 version. But in this movie, in the last one, you can see more clearly how there's a sisterhood, precisely, it's so similar to the stories of Avalon and Camelot. There's this
Yeah.
sisterhood who has powers, and they're actually seeing, okay, from these women, whom are we
Yeah.
going to bring them with which men to give birth to, like the one that topic comes up in so many different stories, no? The chosen one. It's in Star
Yes.
Wars, in the Matrix. It's also Lord of the Rings, of course. All of these
Yeah.
different movies and stories, Avatar as well, both
Yes.
the animated one and the one from James Cameron. There is
Mm.
one, well, we can change the name again, no, between fate and destiny. You make this distinction a lot in your
Mm.
teachings, but
Yes.
it's like it's their destiny, no? By destiny, they have to.
Mm.
But this is also something interesting because you were mentioning earlier that the kingdom of Camelot, you cannot inherit it. You have to build your own Camelot. So
Yes.
I think that
Yeah.
in every story that has a similar uh, like outcome is because somebody's trying to take over the Camelot of somebody else, like
Hmm.
inherit it directly, and then everything goes to kaput,
Yeah.
to
Yes.
say it kindly,
The
no?
smithereens. Yeah.
Yeah, everything goes to smithereens because they haven't understood the premise. The premise is you are not to be taking something that does not belong to you. You have to build your own uh, realm, your own castle, your own kingdom.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. And again, that kingdom, that particular kingdom that is being initiated through Avalon or through these archetypes we're talking about, um, these are not natural kingdoms, animal kingdoms, but not even human kingdoms in the sense of a political kingdom, economic kingdom, and so forth. The normal kingdoms that we know, or nations, whatever you want to call them. This is really based upon higher knowledge, what we just talked about, metaphysical kingdoms. So it's founded and um, built upon a manifestation of the higher world. This is a very old concept. It's still like every temple, like the Temple of Solomon, was built according to the stars. It's the same idea. Or the churches and the pyramids, these are all like replicas or a mirror image of the higher worlds. And of course, the constellations above, which is the metaphysical, higher, or archangelic world.
And it
Yeah,
also brings us back to Jesus because Jesus said, "My kingdom is not from
mm,
this world." Like you are
exactly.
not understanding, what this is really about.
Yeah.
Wow, makes a lot of
And at the
sense.
same time, we build it upon the earth. So we
Yes,
really
because it has to be
manifest
like
it.
a reflection, no, as above, so below.
Yes, exactly. You can't skip this place. Even
Yeah,
more so, according to the Kabbalah, of course, we know this. All the listeners, I hope, still remember that the final Sephira is Malkut, is the world of Asiya. That's the final manifestation and the condensation of all the worlds in one. That's where God is manifesting as the Shekhinah or the Grail.
yeah.
But around the Grail, a kingdom has to be built, so that the presence of the miracle is also contained and is radiating out throughout the world through a particular format, particular place, a shrine, or a castle.
Okay, that's
Mm.
interesting.
Yeah, and of course, the different shrines and castles and or churches that do not, definitely not do that job, and they fall apart sooner or later.
Exactly.
Um, and this is also the end part of the story when Camelot eventually falls.
Hmm.
So that's an interesting instruction. So what we could do, Ida, I don't know about you, we could say a little bit more, for example, about Morgana and Merlin
Yes, please.
to get a
Yeah, that's what
better
I was gonna tell
idea.
you. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So one of the first stories, probably the proto story of Merlin, is exactly at that location at Bala Lake. And at the same time, and this is again a historical reference to this one of the kings. There's not just one king. You don't have the United Kingdom those days. This is around 500 AD, where a certain warlord or king of Sussex, probably around London, his name is called Vortigern, King Vortigern, although Vortigern seems to be also a title, not just a name. And he's quite a powerful man, but he can't really, he's not really up to the war with the rest of the kingdom, because everything is divided there. And especially also the Jutes and the Vikings coming in, and the Saxons, the Anglo-Saxons. This is just historically very accurate. This happened during those days. So he flees from Sussex into Wales, and he says to two particular Anglo-Saxons, he pays them very well. He says, "You guard the borders there at London." But he becomes completely paranoid. So in Wales, he starts to build a huge tower and a complex, like a castle, but particularly a tower. And the problem is with the building of the tower, the foundation doesn't hold. So in every, I don't know, weeks or months, it is the castle crumbles down again and again. And he becomes more desperate because he wants to build a stronghold for his own protection. And so eventually he calls upon his astrologers and wise men. He says, "You have to explain me what happens here." And they don't know actually. So, but they have to come up with a good reason. Otherwise they may be beheaded or something.
Yeah.
So they say, well, the problem is we need to sprinkle the soil with the blood of a young boy whose mother is human and whose father is not of this world, is a demon. And he says, "Okay, get me this boy." So they go and search the whole of Wales because they don't have a clue who it is and if the story is true. And to their amazing, boy exists. And they find him at a lake in a village and playing with another boy. And they say, "Well, I'm sorry, but what's your name, by the way?" And he says, "I'm Merlin." So it's not Merlin, but the Welsh Merlin. And they say, "Well, we have to take you." So his mother is devastated, of course. But the boy seems to be completely unattached and unmoved by the whole thing. And so he's taken to the south of Wales and to the tower and to Vortigern. And so eventually the king says, "Vortigern, I'm sorry, boy, but we have to sacrifice you. And, this is the reason why." And then the young Merlin, probably around 12 years or something, he started to laugh. He's not concerned about what's going to happen to him. So then, of course, the king becomes very interested. He says, "Why are you laughing?" He says, "Well, because I know the real reason why the tower doesn't hold." So this is the first moment that we as a reader of the romances get a clue about the power of Merlin, which is first of all prophetic. So in the popular story, he's a magician or a sorcerer. But first of all, he's a very strong prophet. He foresees. And he said, and then of course Vortigern is extremely interested, and he says, "We have to go underground because there's a cavern, huge cavern, and two dragons are sleeping there. And their power is so strong, and every now they wake up and they fight. And because of this, of course, the soil is unstable, and therefore the tower collapses."
Yes.
And they go down and they find that it's true what Merlin is saying. He says, "Well, we have to free the dragons, and then we can just fill the cavern and we can build up the tower again." And this is being done. It's a beautiful story, really. The dragons are released, one white, one red, and they fight with each other. And some say these are the dragons, or the Cymrus of Wales and the Anglo-Saxons fighting together.
That makes
And
sense,
then,
yeah.
yeah, well, there's so many ways of looking at it. Some see it as the two pillars on the tree of life, and the caduceus of Hermes, which are actually all two serpents or dragons. And the middle pillar is the staff, the caduceus, that wand of Hermes, which is actually Merlin, same archetype, and it reconciles the two opposing forces in the middle. Yeah, and then Merlin actually remains for a while the counselor of Vortigern. And although Vortigern is the king, but the real person with power is not Vortigern, because he's completely dependent upon the wisdom and the prophecies of Merlin. So Merlin is with Vortigern as long as is needed for a higher purpose, not for Vortigern, you see.
Yeah.
Because what eventually Merlin wants to do, he wants to reunite Albion, the old kingdom, so that everything can come together. And you could say probably that that's the purpose of the higher worlds, is to unite the opposing forces within the world, because that's the kingdom of heaven eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's one of the first stories there of the young Merlin growing out to become a real boy, teenager. And he's already an influencer of the king, or even a kingmaker, as they are sometimes called.
That makes sense. Yes. That
Very
he should
much.
have that reputation. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are so many different references, mythologically and also Kabbalistically, to say about this story. At least I would like to point out one thing, is that Vortigern as a king, history of life, didn't have a good center. That's why the dragons, you could say, are also the internal energies of the King Vortigern, and they were definitely not balanced, because there was no middle pillar. There was no real place of the king in Tiferet.
Yeah.
And so there was no direction giving of the force as is needed. So that's a way of looking at it symbolically. And you need someone of a higher order, someone from Avalon, to instruct you in these ways. And this could be, in our terms now here, as we talk about it, and all the listeners, in Kabbalistic terms, that's your Magid. Someone who knows your story, because that's what Magid means, storyteller.
Yeah.
And to remind you, to make you to remember what you already knew. And that's one of the functions of Merlin, as the Magid, the storyteller, the higher counselor.
And the thing is, if you're telling a story, you're creating.
Yes. Very much. Yeah. And most of the time, we all only know the half of our own story, which is the human natural part, the lower part of the tree. But often the higher part is forgotten. We occasionally see it in dreams, or see it in a story, or you have a momentary epiphany about something, and then it's gone again. But to really live that truth and integrate it with the lower part, that's the job of the Kabbalists. That's the job of the ones who want to rebuild Camelot.
Yes, bring heaven down to earth, as you say quite often.
Yes, exactly. That's another way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay.
So later on,
there's so much to say about this too, no? But I think that talking about their origin stories can also help us frame what will come later, right?
Oh yes, no, certainly, yeah. I mean, it's definitely Merlin in the proto stories that's much more present than Morgan Le Fay. You see her later on, almost like growing up together with King Arthur, as they are half brother, half sister, probably. Yeah. Genetically. Yeah. Yeah. So We could just mention that story about how Arthur actually came into the world, and the first real evidence of Merlin being a kingmaker.
Okay.
If you want to.
Yeah, sure.
Is that an idea? Just to proceed
Yes.
with that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So again,
because also when you're talking about the origin of Arthur, you are also talking about the origin of Morgan as well, or Morgane, as I like to call her.
exactly. Yes. Because probably, but I'm saying this more mythically than historically,
Yeah.
Arthur and Morgane had the same mother. And that lady was called Igraine, or Igerna sometimes. You can read this. Who was a queen. She was of royal blood, but she was also a priestess of Avalon, according to certain stories. Um, and she was at the time of Arthur wasn't born, didn't exist yet. Um, and she was with a certain king called Gorlois. He was one of like a duke or a king of a place in Cornwall or Cornwall itself, and they were invited at the court of Uther Pendragon, and this was the replacement um, of King Vortigern after his death years later. I mean, there was a king in between, but that's not relevant now. But eventually, Uther was the strong warlord, and they invited all the dukes to a certain banquet. And there it happened that Igraine and Uther, by seeing each other at first sight, they fell in love. And that was a big problem, of course. Not so much for Uther, because he was a king and basically he could do whatever he wanted. Um, but of course, Igraine was occupied. She was the queen of Gorlois. And the story goes that Merlin had something to do with this, falling in love of the two, bring
Kind
them
of like
together.
a Cupid, no?
Exactly. Yeah. The Eros dynamic there. And something is set in motion. And of course, we know falling in love is probably one of the strongest forces in our natural experience. And you lose yourself and sometimes the rest of the world. And that's what happened. But Igerna had like a sense of reality, common sense. And she said to her husband, Orlois, we have to go. We have to go out of here because this is not going well. Because Uther is so persistent. And though, so they went back to Cornwall. Some say to Tintagel, the castle at the coast. And but Uther wouldn't accept the no. So he followed with his man and with his counselor, Merlin, at the time, all the way to Cornwall to get Igerna or Igraine. And so they have a whole siege of the castle, which is not very difficult if you look at the real location of Tintagel Castle. But it's also very difficult to get in as an enemy. So eventually, Merlin helps Uther by actually changing or transforming the outer appearance by magic of Uther in that of Gorlois. And this way, he can enter the castle, he can go wherever he likes, eventually ends up with Igraine, who thinks he is Gorlois, of course. Meanwhile, the real Gorlois is out of the castle fighting Uther's man and dies in the battle. And that night they sleep together, and out of that, she becomes pregnant with Arthur. And the next day, all these dead men are being brought in, and one of them is Gorlois. So, of course, she's devastated and confused at the same time, because who is this and who is that? And then she finds out that Uther has manipulated her Excuse me. But at the same time, um, there's nothing she can do. And she is overpowered, and she has lost the war, lost her husband. And Merlin had said to Uther before this all happened, I will help you with this magical intervention. But there's one thing you have to do, that is, as soon as the child is born from the womb of Igraine, it is mine. Well, he didn't care much about a child. He had many. He just wanted his queen. So this is how it happened. And that, excuse me, that fine day when Arthur was born, Merlin came to claim the little infant and took it away for his or her own purposes. And that's that one of those examples where you can see that they are just pieces on the chessboard, because there's a higher thing at stake there, a higher vision, a higher purpose, because a particular king needs to be born to be placed in the world to raise a particular king. And then, yeah, what it does to the human being is not of prime importance.
Yeah. It seems very cruel, like obviously, no, from
Yeah.
the human perspective. But as we were saying earlier, no, like they had this agenda that was supposedly serving the higher worlds, and like these things were of no consequence in their minds, no.
Yeah.
But can we come back a little bit to Morgan or Morgaine, because she,
Yeah.
well, is, I don't know if in some sources or all of them, it is said that she's Igraine's daughter. Actually, she's older
Yeah.
than Arthur. So, in
Yeah.
this case, is there anything mentioned about Morgaine while this is happening?
Well, in some stories, yes, definitely. And probably the the father of Morgan Le Fay is also not of this world. That's an idea, at least. So he is also from um, the lands of Cornwall, but at that time it's being called differently. And that land is not just normal physical land, but it is something of the natural world, or the intelligence of the natural world, which is fairy or the fae or the she. And so she has also this relationship with this man, with this king, and out of it, Morgan Le Fay is born. And therefore, like Merlin, she has certain abilities, which is, well, quite similar to Merlin's, like being a prophetess, and she has the sight, so to speak, and all the particular characteristics of the old ways as being mentioned. So knowledge about the natural world, about herbs and plants, about certain incantations, about spells, about manipulation of the psychological world. Um, so she is also like Merlin, in between worlds, coming into this world and then withdrawing out of it. Therefore, she is often called, um, well, the mistress of the mists, or the veil between the worlds. She is the one who opens them or closes them at will, and she is therefore also the guardian of Avalon,
So I
as of course the mature priestess.
as you're mentioning this, I want to go back to one very popular popular culture reference, which is precisely the Mists of Avalon.
Yeah,
So what they say there is that these priestesses of Avalon, because there were many for this
yes,
sisterhood, they were prepared to serve the goddess, and
yeah,
part of of that serving involved rituals, for example, mating rituals with people that
yeah,
the elders would choose, like these two have to come together to bring a child, just like Merlin did with Uther and with Igraine.
yes,
Um, and probably that is why Igraine mothered Morgan with another man, because maybe there was this ritual, a beltane ritual or whatever, and then they said you have to get together and bring this child forward. Could be one thing. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that Morgan, she was taught in the ways. Like, it's not like, oh, she naturally, no. She had to go through a certain education, a curriculum, a practice.
Yes.
And this, I imagine this would have taken place in Avalon at some point. Is this correct, or am I?
No, that's exactly where the story is pointing towards. And for Morgana, that is completely in Avalon. And for Arthur, it is partially in Avalon. So he learned to be not a prophet per se, but he learned about the metaphysics of the higher worlds. And the other part of his education is at the human world, at the court of his uncle, called Lord Cedric. But Morgan is completely under the education and the influence of Avalon, definitely. So that's the higher worlds. He's completely embodied within the spiritual realm, so to speak. And which in this particular epoch within the story, exactly as you said, has to do with the goddess worship, the Celtic goddess reference as the prime deity.
Yes, with the three faces, no? The mother, the maiden, and the crone. The three different stages. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you see. Yeah. And she's a representation of it. So Morgan can appear like all of these three in different disguises. And Merlin has more or less the same kind of shape-shifting abilities. And Morgan has it too. And another of the duties, the mystical duties of the Sisters of Avalon, is to always keep a certain kettle or cauldron burning with heavenly dew called awen often. And so this is a very interesting alchemical process because the heat has to be at a certain temperature. It definitely shouldn't go out, of course. So it's like the sisters have to tend the fire or blow to make sure that there's always the same kind of heat. So they are, of course, the keepers of the cauldron, which is, of course, a very feminine symbol, and also to contain the containment of the life essence, which is within it, the awen.
Wow.
And that brings us back to the idea that Avalon is the life-giving essence and source of the natural world. Without that dew or that essence, that flowing stream into the worlds, there cannot be any life, there cannot be any growth. And of course, we know this in the Grail stories, we've talked about it a few times, that when the land dries up, you have the barren wasteland. This is when the contact with Avalon is being severed, cut off, or we are just oblivious of it. And then that's what happens. Or, of course, if we try to steal the cauldron by force, and then the consequences are also dire and problematic for the human being. Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. I don't know if you want to add something else to your mic, and then we can start wrapping up today's program.
Well, let's say at least one thing about that dew or awen, that it's not just a life-giving force, but it's also the source of inspiration and magical transformation. So if we're open to it, you may receive this dew of heaven, or prana in more Eastern Sanskrit terms. And that's one of the ideas about how Camelot is also a kingdom, a vessel that is open for reception for the higher worlds. So how does it receive the inspiration and the nurturing of Avalon? And that's one thing that we can ask ourselves as a human being. If this is your kingdom, for example, then how are we open to the higher worlds? Do we meditate? Do we pray? What way? What's our methodology to be open to receive the dew of heaven?
You
So
have to
that
look
that
up.
could be to end up, yeah, to end up our session almost, is to, yeah, to leave us with this question.
Okay, then we can come back to this because I think that there's more to be said about Morgane, definitely.
Yes. Oh,
And
yeah.
she's a fascinating archetype because you can
Yeah.
see like this side of there's the light and the darkness, and she has no issue. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that in the case of Morgane, it's more evident that she has no problem crossing boundaries, whereas Merlin, because maybe because he's older, he's like
Mhm.
this grandpa kind of figure, like Santa Claus, or and you feel like he's like a fatherly figure. He will protect you, and he's doing his
Yeah.
dark stuff, and nobody really cares because oh no, he's a sweet man, he's a sweet old man. But in her case, like no, she's a temptress from the devil, no, and it's more evident
Yeah.
because of those ideas that we have about the feminine and the masculine also, and I think that's
Oh,
also
oh,
interesting
sure.
to keep in mind.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we'll go into that the next time. But of course, a
Yeah,
lot of the stories within Grail romances are Christian uh, tainted stories.
of
So the
course.
woman is most of the time not always very popular, or is the symbol of, the diversion, going off the path. She's like the Eve, the reason for the destruction
Exactly.
of the Edenic consciousness, etc. Um, yeah, that's a bit problematic sometimes, but
Yeah.
we will go into that. Yes.
Yeah, the Eve or the Lilith. And I think it's important. That's, I think, also why, for example, the Mists of Avalon was so appealing to many women,
Mm,
because it's like giving us light of these feminine archetypes in the history of Avalon and Camelot, which
yeah.
is like showing us the real energy of the goddess, which I would say that is the equivalent of the Shekinah. Am I correct, or am I very confused? The goddess and the
No,
Shekinah
no,
are
no.
like similar in nature, like
Mm,
this feminine aspect connected to the natural world. And instead of
mm,
being like this
yep.
dark temptress and this manipulative person that just wants to get her way, like it's showing us the women from
Hmm.
Avalon and Camelot, with a different light, and bringing peace to that side, not just like, oh, it's their fault, and like everything that
Mm,
went wrong is because of these women, no, because Guinevere couldn't have children, and then
yeah.
Brigine, she also like did her magic on Arthur, and so she bore this
Yeah.
child. She manipulated the child to go and fight his father, and you see, like
Mm,
all the downfall also has a lot to do with the women. No, you're like, no, this is not the only way to see it.
yeah.
So I
No,
think it's
exactly.
to talk about it.
Yeah. No, and again, the reputation of these two characters is often indeed not always that good in a human sense. If you see what the choices they make. But then again, if we as human beings are serious on our spiritual quest and path, we have to make certain decisions and choices that people are not always happy with. But there is sometimes no compromise. You cannot just stay the same and remain with the same contacts and relationships, friendships, whatever it is. Something will change and happen. You have to make unpopular decisions for yourself. And that's exactly what is being instructed by these stories about these two people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that being
Mhm.
said, can you please remind us, Mike, where can
Yeah.
we see what you're posting, what you're sharing, your activities? How can people reach out to you on social media, please?
I will say definitely thank you. So the two websites are circleofavalon.nl and kabbalahmysticalschool.com. And there you can find some information, of course. And if you want to find me on Facebook, it's Mike Bais, or the accompanying sites of Circle of Avalon and my book page there of
Excellent.
the Kabbalah and Science. So there you can find other things. Yeah, that's the most important thing. You can send me an email if you have any questions, of course, to you about this episode, this part of the program. And maybe nice to say that after the publication of the Watkins book, I've started again with writing, editing the Kabbalah and the Roundtable book. So it will take a while, but I'm working again on it. So yeah.
Really looking forward to that. And I think that these recordings that we're doing on the topic are going to be preparing people and interesting them like, oh, what are we going to find in the book? Because obviously here, like, we're sharing a bit of information, but the book, all the years you have of experience and research, obviously you're going to give a much richer view about Avalon and Camelot and how those ideas relate not only to Kabbalah but also to our daily life, no? Because as we were mentioning at the beginning, and I almost forgot at the beginning of our program, what is going on, right? Like we had an eclipse,
true,
and also the aurora borealis, everything going on, and it's like, what is that activating within us, and how does that relate to these mythologies, no? So there is a
very
connection,
much.
definitely.
Yeah, we forgot about it to talk about it. Exactly. Yeah.
But maybe we can go into it a little bit more next time. But just know that everything is connected. Like it's not just random stuff. I think that the fact that we're looking up, trying to look at those phenomena, maybe it also will inspire us to look up also to the higher worlds, not only physically, but also like energetically. So, no?
Completely. Very
All right.
important.
Anything else you would like to add, Mike, or how are we ending our session today?
Well, I would say what I said almost at the beginning of just as a reminder, and people who are following our program, to make it in a kind of a story. So how are we open and receptive to Avalon and the symbol of the cauldron of Morgana and the Nine Sisters? How do we receive our inspiration on a daily basis? How do we invest in to be a vessel, a cauldron ourselves to receive that? I would say that's a nice piece of homework there, or a reminder at least.
Excellent. So, Synchronauts, you have some inner work to do. Look within and try to find what is inspiring me and how does my own story relate to what everything that we have been discussing in this program and will be continuing to share related to Camelot and Avalon. Thank you so much, dear Mike. Thank you, Synchronauts.
My pleasure.
We'll see each other very soon. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.